You're traveling through the unknown, a journey beyond the corners of reality, where the shadows whisper and the chill runs deep. Welcome to the dimension where your deepest fears are given form. This is the Midnight Mystery.
"I will be there for you, day or night, and the times between," she said. That raised an eyebrow, but not my suspicions. I had blindly loved Abigail Thorpe for 6 years. At the time, her peculiar wedding vows seemed endearing. She was only adding a little sprinkle and spice to the ceremony, as she did with all things. That was what I naively believed. Richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, Abigail continued. Glued or unglued. My second eyebrow raised, leveling with the first. "I will protect you," my fiancé said. "You will be safeguarded during your resting hours. You are my world, a vessel for my love, my prosperity, my future. And I hope to be a vessel for you, a provider, an abundant source of wealth, joy, and love. I love you, Noah." "Okay," I slowly replied, smiling uncertainly at Abigail's speech. "Are you just trying to delay saying I do?" The crowd laughed, and, ever the aspiring comedian, I grinned smugly. I was oblivious to the significance of the union being forged. "I'm ready for your vows, Noah." Abigail warmly caressed my hands whilst looking at the vicar. "Yes," the man stammered, dumbfounded by her vows. "Right, Noah." I cleared my throat. "What version of ChatGPT were you using? I didn't get anything like that." My fiancée rolled her eyes and shook her head. "Fine," I chuckled. "I'll be serious. Okay?" I summoned a deep breath, unmasking the clown to reveal a vulnerable man beneath. "Abigail, there is no other woman quite like you," I said. "From the moment we met, I was drawn to you, the only person goofier than me. I knew that I had to marry you, if only to prove to my parents that, comparatively, I'm not that weird." I heard my mother and father chortling from the front row. "You are boundlessly kind, intelligent, and beautiful. My one and only love, in this lifetime and any lifetime," I continued, pausing for the obligatory utterances of gooey approval from the crowd. "I love you, Abigail. And do you promise to be a vessel for my love?" She pressed, fidgeting on the spot. That was the only odd question which didn't surprise me. It was a vow my fiancé had requested, that we would both be love vessels for one another. Abigail had always been a poet, all teasing aside, and I viewed her entire declaration as a typical Abby oddity. The vessel vow was no different. It was just her unusual form of love language, something sort of innuendo perhaps, I thought, stifling a grin. "I promise to be a vessel for your love," I agreed. Once the words escaped my lips, I immediately caught a glimpse of something in Abigail's eye. The fleeting reflection of a shadow in the corner of the church. It had the shape of a man, a misshapen man, and it came with the sensation of my brain being painfully clamped, only for a moment, but long enough to make me wince. "Noah?" the vicar asked, noticing my brief flinch. "I'm fine," I muttered, shaking my head to free the pins and needles. Abigail smiled, but it was a faux smile, not the adoring one I'd come to know over the years. "It is time for the declaration of intent. Do you, Noah Chapman, take Abigail Thorpe to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the vicar asked. "I do," I said, eye twitching as I wrestled with what felt like ethereal fingernails digging into my skull. "And do you, Abigail Thorpe, take Noah Chapman to be your lawfully wedded husband?" the vicar asked. "I do," my fiancé nodded, lips bending ever upwards. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride," the vicar said. The crowd roared with applause as my mouth met Abigail's pursed lips. Much like her smile, much like that entire ceremony, it was nothing like any other kiss we'd shared. I had never felt both warm and cold from her touch. I'd never felt that way from anything. It was the happiest moment of my life, yet it was clouded by trepidation, a clinging fear. But what followed was not horror. My wife and I began a whirlwind romance, a relationship deeper than the one we had prior to marrying. That swiftly flushed any doubts down the drain. The slight blip on our wedding day must have been jitters. That was what I chose to believe, a cliché, but one that made the most sense. The first bump in the road came a month down the line. The topic of our living situation arose for the 100th time. From her late parents, Abigail inherited the family home and a sizable plot of land. She wanted us to move there. Understandable, of course. However, I resented the idea of her relatives viewing me as a gold digger. Her great aunt once made a chastising remark that stuck with me. "Everybody knows the Thorpe name," she huffed to Abigail. "I've got my eye on you, Chapman." The implication infuriated me. I was already financially stable before meeting Abigail. I worked as a senior software engineer. I didn't need the Thorpe fortune. "The house is yours," I told my wife. "Do what you want with it, but don't feel that you have to include me. It's your inheritance. I'd rather not move into that place." Abigail groaned. "Stop being so stubborn, Noah. It's not a handout, okay? We're married. What's mine is yours." "Well, what about Chris?" I pointed out. "Isn't he interested in it? Does he not resent your parents for leaving the estate to you?" "He inherited a sizable sum of money, the yacht, and the lake house," Abigail said. "My brother received just as much wealth as me." "Does he see it that way?" I asked. "After all, we are talking about Thorpe Manor. That's your family's heritage." "Heritage? Oh, please. Chris only cares about money." My wife laughed. "You need to get over this, Noah. Nobody is going to despise you for living in that house with me. Forget my great-aunt Gertrude. She's a bitter old woman. An aunt, might I add, who my mother hated." Arguing with Abigail was like chewing skirt steak. It was tough, and it ended with jaw ache. Naturally, I eventually buckled and agreed to move to Thorpe Manor. In fairness, Abigail was right. I was being stubborn. I admit my flaws. Pride is one of them. In truth, I did want to move there. The property was one of unbeatable splendor, and I was secretly jubilant at the prospect of living in a manor. Marital bliss resumed. All seemed well for the following few months. Better than ever before, as I said. I forgot all about the argument and the strangeness of our wedding day. And then came the migraines. Much like the day of the ceremony, electric shocks filled my head. Brain zaps. They flared up during the mornings mostly, but the dull pains sometimes persisted throughout the day. And there were other health issues. No matter how much I slept, I was perpetually fatigued, hazy-brained, living life on standby mode. It felt as if I were lugging a plumper brain around, to the detriment of my thinking ability. And that was strange, as I'd never been the type to feel excessively tired. I was a night owl. But suddenly, I seemed unable to stay awake past 10 in the evening, and nothing noticeable in my lifestyle had changed. "Are you okay, sweetie?" Abigail asked. I sighed heavily. I feel tired." My wife finished. "Lie down for a little while, honey. I'll cook dinner tonight." "No, I said I'd do it. Don't you have to prepare for that presentation in the morning?" I asked. But Abigail shushed me, and I thanked her, giving her a tight squeeze. Then, I waddled dozily to the manor's spacious lounge, picking one of the 3 sofas to rest my weary, weighty head. I slumped onto a cushion, and my body tumbled immediately into the land of Nod. But my dreams were feverish, the eccentric, surreal nightmares of a body running on fumes. When the body viciously reboots itself after countless sleepless nights, the mind runs wild. And this wasn't my first fever dream since moving to the manor, just as it wasn't the first time I'd seen the man in the corner of my sleep-fueled visions. The man with gray eyes and no other features on his face. I woke from my nap around 6:30 in the evening. I'm sure I would have slept until dinner was ready, but the sound of an agitated conversation disrupted my rest. "You need to leave," Abigail urged. "It's far too early for you to be." "He's asleep." A man's familiar voice interrupted. "Let's do it now. I'm growing impatient." "No, dinner's nearly ready," my wife huffed. "He'll be waking up soon. There'll be time later." "Fine," a woman grunted. "At the midpoint, then." "At the midpoint," Abigail said. I squeezed my eyelids together, body trembling as I tried to decipher the coded conversation. I was racking my brain to pinpoint those voices. I was distracted during dinner. I wanted to confront Abigail about the mysterious visitors who left before I pretended to wake up. Of course, she would have known that I'd been eavesdropping, and something about the nature of their talk set me on the back foot. I felt exposed. Abigail had never made me feel exposed before. When we finally went to bed, I stayed awake with my eyes firmly shut. I anxiously awaited whatever scheme Abigail and her unknown accomplice had in store. I channeled my inner night owl, and I wasn't worried about nodding off. Nerves will keep me awake, I decided, as would the thunderstorm which brewed outside. However, I was baffled to be woken by my alarm clock around 7 in the morning. I'd failed to resist the pull of sleep, and the sinister connotations of that fact were starting to dawn on me. The exhaustion, the excruciating headaches, the strangers in our home. Something was uneven. And on this particular morning, there was something else. The legs of my joggers were dirty and sodden. Have I been sleepwalking outside? I wondered. I wasn't convinced, so I resisted the urge to mention anything to Abigail. It was all connected somehow. My wife had something to do with it, and I devised a way to find answers. I would film myself, see whether I'd been getting up in the middle of the night, going for strolls, repeatedly bludgeoning my head, perhaps. There had to be a logical explanation for everything, even the conversation. You might have misinterpreted or misheard them, I suggested to myself. Or better yet, it may have been a dream. With renewed confidence, I crossed my fingers that the video footage would clear up everything. After setting up the camera, I went to bed with giddiness in my gut. I longed to wake and finally have some answers. Unfortunately, the next day, there were no damp patches or grubby stains on my clothes, and the video recording revealed that I slept through the night. Over the following days, this continued to be the case. I was starting to lose faith until Chris came to stay. Much to my annoyance, Abigail's drunken brother, upon arriving at our manor, collapsed on the sofa. He won a sizable sum of money from gambling and immediately splurged it on a 2-day bender. It wasn't the first time that he'd earned and blown wealth. Is this going to be a recurring thing? I sighed. My wife shrugged. He's an addict, Noah. We have to support him. He's working on it. Maybe. He's also a sociopath, I said, and he never has to account for his actions. Abigail pouted. Look, he's still my brother. Besides, he actually came here to clear his head. Right. I nodded disbelievingly, rubbing my own pounding forehead. Speaking of which, the migraines are back. I'm going to bed. Okay, sweetie, my wife said, planting a kiss on my sore brow. Good night. The next morning, I woke to that familiar feeling of disorientation, and for the first time, I was glad about it. I knew exactly what it meant. I rushed to my computer, uploaded the footage from the hidden camera, and fast-forwarded through the events of the prior night. What the... I began. At midnight, Abigail's eyes opened fully. She lay on her back, as stiff as a plank, as if she'd never really been asleep. As if she were hardly human for that matter. My wife rose like a machine, and her stiff limbs carried her to the bedroom door. When she opened it, Chris entered. It's time. Is he ready? My brother-in-law asked. Abigail nodded. Good, the man replied before clearing his throat. At the midpoint, you unglue. In a blur of motion too fast to track, something awful happened. My body split in two. Abigail and Chris watched silently as my sleepwalking form rose from the bed, unbinding itself from the black, shadowy shape of a body left on the bed. My real-life jaw fell. I watched as my wife and brother-in-law walked out of the room, followed by my zombified body. And, left behind, there was only a black spectral form atop the bed, a shadow that had my vague shape. It was a vibrating energy, with my outline rigidly frozen in place. Hyperventilating, mind crippled by existential dread, I shivered in front of the computer screen, watching an unmoving recording of some terrifying spirit. After half an hour, Abigail and Chris returned, followed seconds later by my shuffling, lifeless shell. "Are you satisfied?" my wife asked Chris. "Never," her brother coldly replied. "Are you?" "Yes," my wife said, tucking my body back into bed. It lay atop the black spirit. "Then why do you do the same?" Chris asked, offering a wicked smile. Abigail ignored him. "I am a vessel for your love. You glue." With those words, the dark specter reunited with my body. Skin absorbed the blackened form. A second later, after rebinding, my recorded self started snoozing soundly. "I love him," my wife said. "You love what he can give you," my brother-in-law taunted. "Good night, Abby." After her brother left the room, Abigail stood in silence for several minutes. She stared at the wall, panting heavily. I don't know what she felt. Rage, sadness, frustration. All I know is that her breathing suddenly slowed until she looked entirely peaceful, serene. And then her head cracked to the side, facing the filming camera. "Fuck!" I cried, falling off the desk chair. And as I climbed to my feet, my eyes were drawn to the shape in the office's doorway. Abigail was home. "I've been waiting for you to wake up," she sighed. "Noah, I can explain." "What the fuck, Abigail?" I screamed. "What the fucking fuck?" I didn't know how to tell. "I'm leaving," I cried, charging towards the stranger in the doorway. "Day or night, heed your vow," she whispered. In a surge of excruciating agony, I felt my body tear in two, and by the time I realized that, I was left staring at my own physical form. It stood before me like a statue. I was a disembodied spirit, enduring a terrifying outer-body experience. "Don't worry," Abigail said, leaving my frozen spirit behind as she led my physical shell out of the room. "I'll fix you." As my wife and my body exited the office, the colors of reality swirled around me, and I stumbled into a liminal landscape of brimstone and hellfire. Strangely, I recognized it. Something stirred in my memory bank. I'd been to that place before, numerous times, every time the Thorpe split my soul from its vessel. And when I woke, I forgot. I was left with nothing but a pounding head and questions. I decided that time would be different. "Hello?" I called. I wandered through the arid abyss, tentatively peering around rocky mounds and sidestepping trickling streams of fire, lava, or whatever otherworldly substance blazed in that wasteland. The sky above was black, but it was not filled with stars. It was an infinite emptiness. Not a sky at all. Not anything. After what could have been an hour or a minute of wandering through nothingness, I eventually abandoned my mission and resigned myself to Abigail's fate. With a deep sigh, I turned my head and prepared to head back. My feet failed me. Following at a distance of no more than 10 yards was a looming, gangly figure, a man with limbs like those of a human, but there was nothing about him that was from our world. He was built of loose, peeling flesh, revealing mounds of black, beating mush beneath the surface of his skin. And as a flare of otherworldly lava lit the air, it illuminated patches of fur on his body. Much like the man of my nightmares, he bore 2 gray eyes and no other features on his terrifying face. "You return to the place between, Noah Chapman," the being lowly noted, speaking from all directions. I shuddered, stumbling backwards. "Yet again you have forgotten my face," he said, tilting his horrid head to the side and eagerly viewing me. "Perhaps, if I wear your lovely skin, you might recognize me." The creature took a silent step towards me, and I wondered whether it had been soundlessly pursuing me for the entire time I'd been in its ungodly land. Terrified of the impossibility before me, I stepped backwards, but the being was nimble, large, omnipotent in its realm, I had no doubt. "What do you want?" I asked. "No," he replied, inching ever closer. You should be asking what they want. I panted fearfully, retreating slowly from the approaching abhorrence. Its eyes glistened a muted gray, swirling in endless whirlpools that threatened to consume me. What have they done to me? I asked. Where am I? Better questions, the creature replied. They tied you to Abigail, and they are using you. As for this realm, you are in the place between places. I clawed my head frightfully. Using me for what? To claim their rewards, he hissed. No souls can step over the border and enter my prison. But a soulless body safely walks through the fire. It can do their bidding. But I have a soul, and I'm here, I pointed out. This isn't my prison, it replied. This isn't anywhere. Neither of us are really here because there is no hair. What do you mean? I cried. You always ask that question. I tire of explaining this, it growled. I am Temnor, and I offer gifts to those who sustain me, Noah Chapman. The hovel by the lake. That is the place in which I have dwelled for 50 rounds of the sun. The Thorpes imprisoned me, and now they feed me. You are my feast. You made a deal with the Thorpes? I asked. I must survive, Temnor answered. I cannot live in a cage. The Thorpes bring me your soulless body. They unglue your spurt from it, bringing me an empty husk, a shell through which I can walk the mortal world for a half hour at the midpoint. In return, I give them whatever they desire. 1 gift per visit. You've possessed me? I whispered. People cannot be possessed, Noah Chapman, Temnor explained. You are not your body. I gasped fearfully, and an unthinkable question spilled out of my mouth. Would you make a deal with me? The terrifying being finally stopped taking strides towards me. He surveyed me with great interest, crinkling his featureless face in a way that almost had the appearance of a direful smile. You have never asked that before, Noah Chapman, it replied. What manner of deal? I stammered, searching for the words. I want freedom from the Thorpes, freedom from you, this place, all of it. And in return, it asked, if not your body, I require something else. I gulped. I don't have the stomach to sacrifice another human to you, even a cruel one. Oakwood, Temnor said. I paused. Oakwood? Yes, it continued. The Thorpes denied my request. I do not need much, just a taste. Why? I cautiously asked. It will unbind me from my prison, Temnor said. And they do not wish to unbind me. They need me, endlessly, again and again, for all of their selfish desires. I won't imprison you, I replied. I only need one thing from you. We need the same thing, it seems, Temnor noted. Freedom. Such sickly poetry. I am curious, however, why haven't you ever fetched Oakwood for yourself? I asked. You've used my body as a vessel to leave your hovel on numerous occasions. I am bound by rules, the being hissed. Do we have a deal, Noah Chapman? Yes. Won't I forget this? I asked. As we speak, Abigail's taking my body to the lake. Yes, Temnor said. I sense her nearing. I shall have to leave this purgatory, and as she always does, she will ask that I make you forget. Will you bring me the Oakwood if I lie? I shuddered and nodded. By the midpoint? It continued. I nodded again. Very well, Temnor growled. I will ensure that you remember. I screamed as my soul was swept away by a swirl of blackness in which the horrifying entity merged with its surroundings. After an eternal plummet, I felt grounded, physical, real. And I realized that the blackness was, in fact, the inside of my eyelids. When I opened them, my soul had returned to its body. I was back in the real world, lying in bed, in the real time, not the one between. Good morning, a peppy voice called, startling me. I turned to face the ensuite door, and my wife was beaming at me with a toothbrush in her mouth. She asked Temnor to wipe my mind, and I had to play along with that notion. It took tremendous willpower, but I smiled. Morning, I croakily replied. Well, afternoon, actually. My wife chuckled. How's your head feeling? Better now you've slept it off? Strangely, I did feel better. I wondered whether Temnor's induced amnesia had been giving me the migraines. I also realized that it was the same day. Hours had passed, but Abigail was simply pretending nothing had happened. And when I looked to the hiding spot on a nearby shelf, I noticed my camera wasn't there. She asked him to make me forget about filming myself too, I realized. What do you want to do today? Abigail asked. It's the weekend at long last. Yeah, well, firstly, I'm going to take my morning walk, I quickly responded. My wife frowned slightly, but her face quickly eased, and she nodded. Fortunately, I did like to stroll around the property every morning, so there was nothing out of the ordinary about that. What had clearly aroused suspicion was the fact that my voice had been filled with such urgency. Before Abigail had the opportunity to piece anything together, I was already out of the house, and I beelined straight for the car. I knew of a nearby road lined with oak trees, and all Temnor needed was a sliver of wood, the smallest amount, and he would be free. I would be free. And as I pulled down the driveway, I took a quick glance in my rearview mirror. Abigail was standing on the front steps. Shit, I whispered, flooring the pedal. She knew I was lying. She could read my face, and I knew that she was smart enough to figure out what that meant. But it was fine. I got away. In fact, I shouldn't ever return, I thought. She can't have my body if I run. She can, Temnor's unmistakable voice whispered. Wherever you go, she can summon your vessel at the midpoint. I shrieked fearfully at the sudden sound in my head, and my eyes were drawn to the property's passing lake. It lay just beyond a small cluster of trees, the small forest, and my body drained of all warmth when I spotted a lurking shape in the pines, long-limbed, gray-eyed, and not quite human. Casting my eyes back to the road, I floored the accelerator and slipped through the manor's main gates. As I drove along the road of trees I had in mind, my mind raced with the possibilities of what my treacherous wife might be doing to reclaim control of my body. After mounting a grassy bank at the foot of some oaks, I retrieved a penknife from the glove compartment. I was thankful that we'd been on a recent camping trip, and I flew out of the car, scrambling up the hill to reach the nearest tree. With a swift flick of my tool, I had shaved a thin layer of wood from a mighty oak beside the road. I did not hesitate to jump back into the car and head home. When I returned, however, the atmosphere of the manor felt different. I trundled tentatively through the main gates and dreaded what I might find at the lake. Abigail and Chris armed to the teeth, ready to massacre me on the spot. But finding nothing was worse. I didn't know what my wife might be planning. I drove onto the grass, heading towards the trees which formed a barrier between the property and the lake. That was when I saw them. 4 figures, standing in a small clearing before the water. Is that Mr. and Mrs. Thorpe? I wondered. How on earth the matriarch and patriarch of the family had returned to life, I did not know. They were watching my car hesitantly approach. They're going to take you, Temnor whispered in my mind. Petrified, I felt the yank of my body splitting from my soul, and I brought the car to a halt. And I watched as my mindless vessel of a body clambered out of the vehicle, walking across the grass towards the demented family waiting by the lake, waiting by Temnor's prison. Reality swirled once more, throwing me into the place between places. The nightmarish, darkened world of lava and terror. The horrifying being spoke from between 2 rock faces. You failed, Noah Chapman, and now they have claimed you as a vessel once more. Is my body in your prison? I asked. The being paused. Yes, I am about to utilize your vessel too. The front pocket of my coat, I whispered. Temnor's eyes glazed, as if he were viewing something in the real world. Oakwood, I see. Your contract will be nullified, Noah Chapman. By the power vested in me, I unbind you from Abigail Chapman. I unbind you from the Thorpes. As the world around me collapsed, so too did my spirit. It stretched into the endless abyss of blackness above me. and I woke on my knees in a dirt clearing by the lake, surrounded by a small cluster of trees that the Thorpes called a forest. Beneath me, there lay a downward, muddy slope concealed by shrubbery and trees. The place that had been Temnor's jail for an untold length of time. Before me, I saw the line which marked the edge of his domain, but I was within it. No soul can step within my prison. But I wasn't burning alive. I could tread across his land. It was no longer his prison. I had freed him. I ran through the trees, ignoring the early evening sun that slipped behind the Thorpe Manor. I was free, spiritually, but I had freed myself of that wretched family physically. I jumped in my car, still sitting with an open driver's door on the grass. But it wasn't the only car around. 100 yards towards the house, Chris's Ford GT was crumpled like paper in the front wall of Thorpe Manor. I wanted to escape, but I had to know, had to be certain. I drove back to the property, getting out of the vehicle and lighting my way with a phone torch. And there, sitting in a bloody mess behind the wheel, was Abigail's baby brother. Chris Thorpe was flattened like a revolting omelet between the mangled seat and the bonnet. What was left of the bonnet? His beloved car, one of the gifts Temnor had no doubt given. Shaking, I found my feet moving towards the front door. I entered the well-lit property on janky legs and found a scene of utter chaos. Overturned furnishings, scratched walls, and demolished decor. In the living room, I found two people I never expected to see again. Two people I scarcely believed I'd seen earlier. Miranda and Harold, the late Thorpe parents. They had once more become lifeless corpses. Harold lay on his back, belly bulging and eyes bloodshot. Gold medallions were spilling out of his mouth. As I leaned more closely, eyeing the edge of particularly blood-stained right eye, I caught sight of what seemed to be a rotund shape squeezing into his eye socket. His entire body had been filled to the brim with coins. The wealth he no doubt acquired through sordid means. And Miranda lay beside him, her body compressed into a gut-spilling mess. She had been constricted by the lavish dress she wore, a dress stained red, and somehow not torn at the seams. It had torn her at the seams. Abigail, I muttered. She was the real reason I returned. In spite of the horror she and her family had inflicted upon me, I still loved the woman. I still had to know what became of her. Temnor had slaughtered the others. I knew he wouldn't have spared her. And when I reached our upstairs bedroom, my suspicions were confirmed. However, the scene was not what I expected. My wife was still alive, but horribly so. In our bed, Abigail lay in a wheezing state. She had aged beyond the years of any mortal being, aged beyond comprehension, to the extent that it seemed cruel for Temnor to keep her alive, a punishment worse than anything the others had experienced. "Noah," my wife whispered, struggling to breathe with withered lungs in a crumbling body. When I walked to Abigail's bedside, I was scarcely brave enough to touch her, fearing that she might become an ashy mound in my fingers. "Why did you do this?" I asked. My wife tearfully mumbled. "I didn't wish for cruel things, Noah. You have to." "You did a monstrous thing to me," I interrupted. "You stole my body, my soul, made me a pawn that you could throw into the lion's den. Money that Dad spent poorly. Pretty things that turned Mum cold and callous. Successful investments that Chris squandered on hedonism and cruelty to others." She coughed. "But I only wanted to bring them back, Mum and Dad. And then I wanted you to love me forever. I wanted us to be together forever. Wanted you to love me unconditionally. I was greedy too. This is his punishment, killing me with age and heartbreak." "That's a lot of wants, Abigail," I whispered bitterly. "And they came at the expense of me." "No, it wasn't going to hurt you," Abigail whispered, eyes fading. "Look what it did to all of you," I said. "I only pray it upholds its end of the bargain." My wife's eyes widened. "What did you say? Bargain?" Did you strike a deal with Temnor? Did you free it?" She gasped, near soundlessly, barely clutching to life. I nodded. "After you imprisoned him." "Imprisoned him?" Abigail shuddered. Is that what he told you? We found him, Noah, locked away in the hovel. Somebody put him there long ago, for good reason. You, somebody else. I don't really care, Abigail, I sighed. This was the only way to free myself. My wife produced a single tear, all she had left to give. May something have mercy on your soul, Noah, for there is certainly no God left. This is Temnor's domain now. As my wife faded into the pit of emptiness we all find at the end of the road, I reflected on her dying words. What use would there be in lying to me? Over the many weeks following her death, I keep wondering what she meant. Should I not have freed Temnor? I know what he craved within his prison. What does he crave beyond it? The 14th of November, 2015. Dear Diary, I do not know how long it has been since I've experienced my last surge of brilliance. You see, I'm an established author, albeit a published one, renowned to most for my fictional writings in dystopian novels. I have published a whopping number of 23 books. 23 with my last book, my last child being God's Rapture, arguably my best work, and the one most questioned, discussed, and sought after by reviewers around the world. Critics were bittersweet, both harsh and well, and as much good attention as my last work had garnered, she drew enough bad ones to match. While I know that the book, written based on the Bible of God's Christian rapture, had indirectly made a mockery out of extremists and devout believers of the religion, I had no intentions of incurring your wrath, my dear God. Lord, have you forsaken me? Have you taken away what you had blessed me with since birth? Have I not been loyal to you? Not a day went by that I missed a day of church. Not one Sunday I'd spent, that I spent outside the house of the Lord, your house. Never mind the harsh, cold stares my fellow churchgoers had been giving me, well or unwell. I had always been there, praying to you and only you. I do not know if my questions would go unanswered, questions I'd been asking every single day for the last 5 years, without a single paragraph written nor a book published. If I had offended you, my Lord, I pray for your forgiveness so that I may have what I once had, once more. I pray that I do not have to end my own life to meet my Maker, you, to figure out my answer. I'm at my wit's end. The 21st of November, 2015. Dear Diary, a week had gone by to no avail. After my 20th confession in the booth with Father Willoughby to seek forgiveness and redemption, I have shown no progress. Father Willoughby is convinced that this is not the Lord's doing, but my own. This is a matter of the heart, Mr. Langley. I'm afraid I cannot help you, he said. Though I'm very much convinced otherwise. I've spent twice the amount of time meeting therapists after therapists with no results to show. Antidepressants, mild sleeping pills, sleep therapy, vacations, time-offs. I've tried them all. How could I, J.K. Langley, one of the greatest writers alive in the 21st century, have lost all of my inspirations in just one day? I have never been this lost since Linda died in the car crash 8 years ago. God, you've taken everything from me. The love of my life, my family, my writing. What more do you want from me? I've done it all right. I did everything right. This just doesn't make any sense. I refuse to accept this. I just can't. I cannot. God, if you have condemned and turned your back against me, please, just show me a sign. I beg of you. The 5th of December, 2015. Dear Diary, I have stopped writing you for more than a week now. True, it's not like I have anything to share, and it's not like I have anyone else to read you. But the therapist did say writing journals will help inspire me once more. It did not. To date, I have written over 20 diaries, each with words far lesser than the ones before. Now, I can't be bothered to write about anything else anymore. Without writing, all else in my life had become mundane. 2 days ago, I met up with Antoinette once more. Some lady I once met in New Orleans last year over the Mardi Gras celebration. I wouldn't have remembered her had I not written about her in one of my other journals. As it seemed, Writing diaries do make a difference after all. I don't normally disclose personal information about myself to anyone. My fans and enemies had long known that I live in a life of seclusion. But there's something about Annie that made me trust her. No, it's more like I want to trust her. Perhaps it's because I have no one else. Long story short, she was convinced that she had another way, a workaround, if you will. A way for me to regain my lost self. I'm to meet her, first thing tomorrow morning in the coffee shop 2 blocks from my home. She wouldn't disclose the real details as to how she intend to fix me, only that it is something unchristianly. I jumped at her offer as soon as she gave it. It's Sunday tomorrow, and it'll be the first time I skip church in a long, long time. If my God wouldn't answer my prayers, maybe her God would. The 6th of December, 2015. Dear Diary, indeed, what Annie recommended had been truly unorthodox. Today, after breakfast, she brought me to a few friends. We met at their place, an enormous mansion that I didn't even know existed up north in New Haven. And I've lived here practically all my life. I was lucky, or so Annie had claimed. Her friends, a group of them, are a huge family of friends. I don't even know that people have that many siblings in a family no more. But they were 7 siblings, and they were only here for the week. Normally they'd be out traveling the world, but this week, out of all weeks, they were here, when I needed them most. Could this be fate now? Surely God wouldn't arrange this for me. Would he? I'm convinced he wouldn't, because he is a jealous God. And what Annie and her friends had offered were gifts from another God, one they all worshipped, one that would reward his true followers. I've always known Annie was rich. She is. And the siblings were far wealthier, more so than anyone I've seen. Viz Samdil is one of the many names their God were known as. Sure, it's a mouthful. But if he's willing to grant me the joy of writing once more, I am his. Of course, nothing is free in this world. Everything's got a price. I'll admit the moment they mentioned the price, I was a little put off. But as it turns out, their price could be my just reward. They wanted me to write a sequel to God's Rapture. Tomorrow midnight, they will perform the final ceremony to welcome me into their circle. I've been promised that I will see changes the first thing after. And I trust them. Again, I have to. The 8th of December, 2015. It's nothing short of a miracle. Dear Diary, I am writing again. 50,000 words in just half day. Even in my best days for the last 10 years of my career I had not achieved this. I've personally read it through again and again, and I know I've outdone myself. It's come back. I can feel it again. The words, ideas, everything just seemed to flow so smoothly out of my mind. The ceremony had been a success, and for the price I had to pay, to undergo the ordeal had been worth it. I'd do it 10 times over. Although I'm not in the liberty to divulge most of what I've underwent, I'll still write in some details here, to remind me of what I had to go through in order to get it back. To get this back. The ceremony had taken place in the large yards not far from the mansion, and lasted for nearly an hour. For most parts, they were borderline grotesque, demeaning, and insufferable. Had I not the resolve to press through, I would have failed. There were parts in the ritual that I had to consume the blood of a snake. Yes, a snake. And I had no idea if it was poisonous or if it would kill me. Annie and Rufus had convinced me that it was perfectly safe, and this was a secret religion in practice for over thousands of years. Hence the crudeness. So I thought to myself, if they had done it, and some people in the past had done it and lived to carry on the ritual, albeit a disturbing one, who was I to say no? I needed their help. In all account, I knew that if I turntailed and walked out of there, I won't ever get to write again, and that was worse than dying. So I drank it, along with other various substances, herbs and insects. The herbs were bearable. The insects nearly turned my stomach inside out. It took me everything I had to chew and swallow the blended assortments of creepy crawlies, which brought me back here, back home. and I'm writing again. So, God, no thanks for your help, that's for sure. I won. Hail vis Sam Deal. The 10th of December 2015. Dear Diary, I was at the 100,000 words in near completion of my book when shit happened. Lucas, my old mutt, the only real fucking family I'd ever had ever since God took Linda away from me, died. He was a 5-year-old Labrador, an age that was neither old nor young to all dogs. I don't understand. The night before I went to sleep, he seemed perfectly fine, but this morning, I found him foaming from his mouth, cold and dead. I wonder if I'll ever see him or Linda again when I die. We do, after all, serve different gods now. At any rate, I have just sent my manuscript via email over to my longtime editor-in-chief, Robert. Once he clears it, we should be able to get the book out by early next year. The 12th of December 2015. Dear Diary, strange things had started to happen. I woke up to find all the plants I have inside my apartment dead, all brown, dried, and shriveled up. I don't understand what's going on. These past 2 days, I've started hearing voices. Whispers, really, around my apartment. Could these be the extended side effects of what I consumed over at the ritual? I sure as hell hope not. I told myself it could be because of my lack of sleep ever since I got back. I realized, as I took the time to write this, I had been awake for the past 5 days, maybe? And I barely slept. I do not feel tired at all. To clear my paranoia, this morning I dialed the number that Annie gave me, in case I needed to talk. She didn't answer. I left her 5 messages. Whatever it is she's caught up with, I hope she comes back to me soon. Because weird shit had started happening. At any rate, I need to get some shut-eye. Now. The 13th of December, 2015. Dear Diary, my attempts to sleep last night failed. I could not get a wink of sleep, not even one bit. But that was not the slightest bit disturbing compared to what I endured in the wee hours of the night. No. At 3 a.m. in the morning, my apartment was literally flooded with water. Water that raised up to my ankle height high. I discovered the source of the flooding, and it wasn't coming from my apartment. It was coming from George's, my longtime neighbor's side of the apartment. Well, he was a devout Christian and all, so we did not get along well, at least after I published God's Rapture. I used to be on good terms with him before that. It was a time when Linda was still alive, and we'd spend time having dinners together every once in a while. So I knew where he'd kept his spare key, underneath his flower pot, outside his door. His flowers had died too, by the way. Using his spare key, I unlocked his front door and entered his apartment. And I headed straight for his bathroom, the source of where all water was coming from. His entire apartment had their lights off, say bathroom, when I got there, finding him dead in a bathtub overflowing with water. His eyes wide opened, bulging as they stared blankly into the ceiling, his pale, swelled and wrinkled skin. It broke my heart, and I think it broke my gut too, because I threw up anything and everything I had. The cops arrived half-hour later, along with some paramedics and all. They were too late because George had been long gone. I had waited for the police to question me that night, to explain about the incident that took place. But they didn't. Heck, they didn't even knock on my door. What had truly happened? Why George had been in the tub in the wee hours of the night in the first place, I do not know. What I do know is that something is terribly wrong, and I am partially responsible for it. The 14th of December 2015. Dear Diary, God's Rapture 2 was supposed to be my redemption. It features yet another fictional character that was meant to personify Jesus. I named him Samuel, the Messiah of the 21st century. In this book, Samuel was supposed to lead the people of Earth into salvation. He was supposed to be the hero that fought off the evil Nephilims that were unleashed upon the Rapture in Book 1. So imagine my fucking surprise when Robert sent me his review over God's Rapture 2, and it turned out, apparently, the fucking opposite. Robert swore up and down that this was the copy I had sent over to him. And he was right. I went back to my mailbox and checked the history of my sent items. Guess what? As it turns out, I apparently wrote a version of God's Rapture 2, the total opposite of what I'd intended, without any fucking idea when I wrote it. How the fuck did this happen? Something was wrong with me. Fucking wrong. The 15th of December 2015. Samuel will rain chaos upon earth. 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 Vis Samdale. Vis Samdale. Vis Samdale. Sam is devil. The 17th of December 2015. Dear Diary, I blacked out for 2 fucking days in a row. I had no memories or recollection of what or when I wrote the past 2 days ago. And as it turns out, I have sold my soul to the fucking devil. Whoever wrote that in my diary, I do not know. But I do know who trashed Jonathan Keith Langley's apartment. Me. My fucking self. There must be some mistake. I did not willingly serve the devil, did I? The 18th of December, 2015. Dear Diary, as it seems, there's no 11th hour for me now. I tried to make things right yesterday. I tried to leave my apartment to get to my church, to beg and beg and beg for forgiveness. I literally couldn't. The elevator had apparently malfunctioned, so I took the stairs. Each flight of stairs I descended. I will return to level 23, my own level. I had no idea how long I tried to leave. I had probably been walking at the stairs for hours, and at some point, somehow I blacked out again. The next thing I knew, I'm sitting right in front of my desk, staring into a manuscript I did not write. Later that evening, I went out from my apartment again. I knocked on every single door of each and every one of my neighbors. To no avail. Nobody would open the door. It was as though there was no one home. So I went back to my room, and I stood at my balcony for the next 2 hours, screaming my lungs out for help. I was hoping that the residents of the apartments across the street would notice me. They didn't. There were cars driving past the driveway 23 stories below, but they were all inside their cars driving so fast that I wouldn't blame them even if they couldn't hear me, even if I were to shout until my voice broke. Then I spent the next few hours contemplating on whether I should take that plunge to freedom. And since I'm here writing in this fucking diary, it's obvious that I chose not to. Fuck. The 19th of December 2015. Dear Diary. Last night, I left another voicemail into Antoinette's mailbox. I told her that I had finished the manuscript, which I did. I had hoped that she would have some explanations for me. I can't give up now. There must be something I could do. 30 minutes after the voicemail I left her, the bitch decided to call back. And the conversation that transpired was weird, to say the least. It didn't feel like I was talking to the vibrant, cheerful Annie. She sounded the same over the phone, except she sounded fucking monotonous. Me. Tell me what the fuck's going on. Me. What the fuck did you do to me? Annie. Is the manuscript ready? Me. Yeah, it's ready. You won't get it until you explain to me what the fuck's going on. Annie. Good work. We will be in touch. Me. I'll burn it now unless you... Asterisk dial tone. Asterisk. She hung up on me. The 24th of December 2015. I blacked out again. The only way I know that it's already Christmas Eve is because of the calendar on the lower right corner of my laptop's monitor. But hey, at this point nothing freaking surprises me anymore, except the person who woke me up this morning after I'd blacked out. It was Antoinette. The bitch had the nerve to show up in front of my doorstep, demanding to enter. And she did not come alone. She came with a group of other people, the 7 siblings, friends she apparently introduced me to, along with many others, none of which I know. The peephole of my door was small, and I only saw Annie, so I did not realize that they were behind her until after I opened the door, and all of them came pouring in. Heck, they're all still here as I wrote this. The 10 of them stood in my living room with unfocused eyes, dazed, almost blissful looking even. They stared at each other with a sinister smile on their face. It's insane. It's fucking insane. I can't get them to leave. I tried screaming and threatening. Boy, I've tried. I even tried calling the authorities. If only my phone worked. The line wouldn't go through. I don't even know why I'm writing this anymore. Perhaps this could be the last way for me to vent out my thoughts. For me to be still. Me. Frankly speaking, I don't feel like myself. Not anymore. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. The 25th of December 2015. Dear Diary, this will perhaps be the final entry, the last piece of my own thoughts, my own free will, written into a cheap $5 notebook. Well, what do you know? Annie finally told me what was actually going on. It's funny, you see. For whoever unfortunate enough to read this, I'll have you know you've been reading the journal written by a dead man. I'm dead, yes. As if that's not clear enough for you, let me repeat that. I'm fucking dead. I had been dead, ever since the ritual took place. They all of them had been dead too since the ritual. So, as it turns out, the devil needed an apostate to write his version of the Bible. And today, the 25th of December 2015, as if done in mockery of Jesus himself, the devil had unleashed his own son to wreak havoc onto earth. As I write this, I'm witnessing hell on earth from my fucking apartment. No, I hadn't been in my apartment all these while. You see, the reason why I couldn't leave my apartment was because I'd been trapped in my own hell. I can never leave here. Once I'd realized the truth, I finally see my reality for what it truly is. The illusion of which I once had, that I was still in my apartment, had vanished. All the windows around my apartment shattered. My entire apartment had been shambles. Everything, and I mean everything, were ragged messes of charcoals. Every fucking thing I once had been burnt beyond recognition and are now covered in black-colored mold. Tables, chairs, all my furnitures, everything. Everything except this notebook. All gone. So here I am, sitting just right outside the windows, watching a sea of bright red, blazing amber lava engulfing the world. It's funny, you see. I wanted to be different. I wanted more from what my truly pitiful short human life had to offer. I challenged God, and I'm now in hell, as nothing more than one of the billions or maybe trillions of tormented souls. I wrote this journal without the intention of letting anyone read it. Now I wouldn't mind, because if you have the privilege to read this, you're like me, a fellow tormented soul, forever trapped here in hell with me. I first saw her when I was 14 years old. I didn't expect it, the woman in the window. It was a day like any other. I was walking home from school, another day of teachers talking endlessly of how the world was coming to an end, and I drifted through my small neighborhood humming the latest Eminem beat. I was halfway home when a quaint brick house caught my eye. There wasn't anything special about it, just your average 2-story suburban home, but for whatever reason, the mere sight gravitated my gaze to it. I stood in front of the house staring with bewilderment, the streets feeling more empty than before, and that's when my stare crawled up to the 2nd-story bedroom window. There she stood, staring out into the street, unmoving. At first, I wasn't too sure if she was looking down at me, so I gave her a polite wave as a slight smile forced itself on my face. She remained the same, not acknowledging my presence, and I began to feel uneasy by her odd behavior. I couldn't look away. For whatever reason, she had captivated my full attention, and it didn't take long for me to realize how beautiful she was. She was the embodiment of the perfect woman. Long blonde hair with ocean blue eyes. Her full lips pulsated my heart to a beat faster than I thought was possible. I noticed a few things looking at this woman. She was smiling, but it seemed forced, as if someone was telling her to smile, and I wasn't too sure, but I think I could almost see a tear form on the edges of her eyes. The sensation of being captivated and terrified crashed into one emotion, one that urged me to run home. I didn't tell my parents about my little encounter. I figured there was nothing to tell. Besides, they would have thought me as some creep leering at some stranger. That night, I couldn't sleep. I must have tossed and turned for hours. Glimpses of that woman swirled around my mind as the darkness that encapsulated my room cautiously vanished as the sun rose. Why couldn't I get her out of my head, that smile? It was just so enchanting, as if she was calling out to me, and in the moment it felt as if I was the only person in the world. I felt beyond tired the next morning. Maybe I had gotten a few minutes of sleep, and I sluggishly walked to school, not bothering to be on time. I walked by the same street from the day prior, but I couldn't find the house. I didn't think on it too long. I figured I most likely passed it, not giving notice because of my sleep-deprived state. My eyes were all too heavy for the rest of the day, and I must have been told by several teachers to wake up, my friends giggling each time it happened. Being a 14-year-old boy, I couldn't wait to explain to them what I had seen. I knew their curiosities would be piqued as much as mine. During lunch, we all gathered, and I described in vivid detail at what I witnessed. They all gawked at me with gaping mouths, enthralled in the idea of some beautiful woman staring down at me. Of course, they wanted to find the house after school. I felt hesitant, not because I was timid, but rather I wanted the moment of being seen by that woman just to myself. Though, after much badgering, I reluctantly agreed to take my buddies there after school. We met at the front steps to our school's entrance. I saw that my friends had told others about my encounter, and a small squad we originally were was now large enough to fill a football roster. I even saw one older kid who was a sophomore. Each one of my new friends kept asking me the same question, one that caused me to roll my eyes every time. No, she wasn't naked. I would yelp out with annoyance. Still, everyone was all too eager to see this mystery woman, and I led my new posse down the streets I remember walking down. At first, I felt confident that I would quickly find the home, since I remember only walking a few blocks before discovering it. But, after turning several corners, the realization of feeling a bit lost inundated my sense of direction. Grunts and moans started coming from my friends, all too impatient. I tried to calm them by saying it was only a few more streets down, but that promise was soon shattered. I couldn't understand it. There was no two-story brick house. In fact, almost every home that we passed were single-story. I scratched at my head, trying to recall where the darn house was. But my deep thought was broken by my friends calling me names, angered at the thought of me lying to them. The eldest kid even punched me in the gut. I fell to the floor like a sack of potatoes, and as I laid on some stranger's yard gasping out for air, I questioned my own sanity, thinking I might have imagined the whole thing. Everyone left me drowning in my own delusion as they all walked away. I felt defeated, silly that I led a small mob to leer at some poor woman. But worse, it seemed as if she wasn't even real. I slowly walked home in shame, dragging my backpack behind me, each step feeling heavier than the last. My head was tilted toward the pavement, not bothering to look ahead. That's when I tripped over a small crack in the sidewalk, and for the second time that day, I found myself on the ground. This is when I picked up on a faint smell, one that seemed familiar. I looked around and saw that the streets were a lot more vacant, all sounds coming to a halt. A soft haze flowed around me as I stood to my feet, and to my wonderment, there stood the two-story brick house. Somehow I found myself back to the home that had evaded me. My heart began to accelerate. A bit of sweat flowed off the side of my face as I looked up to the bedroom window. There she was, like the day before, just staring out the window. My eyes widened with enchantment. She was beyond gorgeous. She was exquisite. She was still smiling, but not at me. To whom she was blessing with her perfect smile was unknown. Her gaze seemed to trail off into some distance, a place I wasn't allowed to know. Though I still could see through the facade of her happiness, an allure of devastation continued emanating from her, and this time I spoke. "Are you okay?" I cowardly whimpered out. My timid yelp fell on deaf ears as she remained unmoved. I questioned if perhaps she was some mannequin, a life-size doll that some weirdo had built to indulge their fantasy. This was a solid conclusion, an explanation to my newly found mystery, but that's when I saw her blink. The movement so rapid it caused me to shudder. She was real. I don't know how long I stood there, leering at her. Time seemed to fade into the ether as my soul flowed out to the universe through this woman. and before I knew it, the sun had set, leaving me shrouded in darkness. Through much effort, I decided to leave the comfort of my blissful view, and I headed home. I dreamed of the woman in window that night, still smiling in my own personal world, but here in my domain, she was smiling at me, reaching out to my very being with her gaze acting as outstretched arms, embracing me into her warmth. I would walk towards her in my dreams, wanting to be with her, but I was never able to reach the window. It slowly moving away the more I walked towards it, like a never-ending treadmill. I usually woke up drenched in my own sweat. It was a sensation like no other, and my life seemed to revolve around the mystery of this woman. I wouldn't see her every day. Sometimes I would go weeks before seeing the brick house. Somehow it would appear to me in different places. I would try retracing my steps, but it was pointless. The location was ever-changing, almost as if she chose when to reveal herself to me. The times I wouldn't see her, she would still make an appearance in my dreams. My world was imploding into one perspective, one where the sun rose and set for her. No one ever believed me about the woman in the window. Most thought of me as delusional, a young boy obsessed with an illusion. Maybe they were right. After all, I did change. I no longer hung out with my friends or even tried to date. My mind was all too enthralled with her. In my senior year, one of my old buddies that I hadn't seen in a while set me up on a double date. I protested the idea. I wasn't too sure if she, the woman in the window, would allow it. Either way, my friend didn't take no for an answer, and we all went out. This is where I met Amber. She was amazing. We found interest in the most similar things, and for the first time in months I felt a personal connection with someone else other than her, the woman in the window. Me and Amber dated for the remainder of the school year. It was probably the most beautiful time of my life, memories forming that would last a lifetime. But sadly, she had plans to move out of state for college, and like most, we broke up at the end of that summer. Funny thing was, during the time I was dating Amber, the woman in the window seemed to disappear. Something I didn't realize, and it wasn't until I was once again single did she come back to me. As I entered college, my visits with the woman in the window became more frequent, each encounter a replica of the last, always smiling while hiding her pain. The appearances were random. Sometimes I would be walking back to the dorm, and it would happen. A bit of mist would form, dissolving my environment, only leaving the visible monolith that was the brick house. Anytime I would see a bit of that mist appear, I knew she was coming to me. My heart would then accelerate as shots of dopamine inundated my body. I would stand aimlessly staring up at her as her blank stare looked past me. I could still see tears forming in her eyes as she swayed back and forth. Her occasional blinks uplifting my soul. Understanding whatever she was something corporeal. Sometimes I would talk towards her, my words falling flat, letting out all of my anguish and frustration. But I still found it to be cathartic. As I entered my final year of college, something changed about the woman in the window, something I couldn't explain. I was in my dorm room studying about psychological dependence when the all-too-familiar smell plagued my senses, and I soon saw the mist flutter around me. I quickly closed my book and sat upright, licking the edges of my fingers, pushing back my hair to a slick tidiness. My eager grin bursting through my skin as my heart throbbed with intensity, and soon the house presented itself to me. My gaze crawling up to the bedroom window, and that's when my mouth gaped open with befuddlement. I rubbed at my eyes, making sure I saw what I was witnessing. Per the usual, she stood still, unmoving, still smiling out to the void, but this time her smile wasn't as large as it usually was, the visible happiness sinking to a more dreadful reality. Now I could see tears clearly cascading down her cheeks. The edges built up to a point where it could no longer house the weight. That wasn't the most disturbing part. No, for whatever reason I could see something protruding from the top of her forehead. It was small horns. I felt horrified at the bewildering display, but I couldn't look away. I stood there, useless as always, indulging in the sight of her presence. These horrors only continued, me feeling dread whenever the mist would form. my heart sinking into the depths of my stomach, knowing it was time to see more monstrosities changing the woman I felt such a connection with. The horns only grew to ridiculous proportions as her body began morphing into anything other than a beautiful woman. I could no longer even tell if she was smiling. An expressionless grin embodied her face as her once blonde hair altered to a crimson-red glow. The woman in the window was slowly turning into a monster, and all I could do was stare on with disbelief, still enamored with her presence. As I entered the real world with college in the rearview mirror, I tried my best to escape the clutches of her grasp, running away any time I would see the mist form. I don't know why, but I noticed the more I stayed busy is when she would stay away. I no longer desired to see her, each time feeling more disgusted after her visit. She slowly turned into something I couldn't recognize, a creature of devilish magnitudes. Around this time I stayed to myself, no trying to make friends, and definitely not trying to date. I just wanted to be left alone. I think she knew that. Perhaps my loneliness is what she fed off of. I wanted to know if others could see her, if this curse was mine alone to conquer. So I scoured the internet, asking people if they seen the woman in the window. But most were hesitant to answer. Sometimes I would get a message to my post of how she has visited them, but then nothing. The conversation would die. I was hoping for some sort of empathy or better community, but I think most were too timid to admit they could see her. On my 30th birthday, she came to me while I was stuck in traffic, the mist blurring my vision, almost causing me to crash. I pulled over to the side, just wanting to get this visit over with. By this point, she no longer resembled any form of her once self. The beauty that had captivated me when I was younger, now gone, and all that remained was some creature. Her eyes vacant of any life, and the smile that made my heart beat with such vigor was now 2 times larger than it should have been. Either way, I had no other choice. I had to look at her, or she wouldn't let me leave. My world was collapsing, and every day was more bleak than the day prior. I counted the days down as I got older, ready for this journey of mine to end. My life was on a hamster wheel, everything the same, turning full circle each day. I think she knew how depressed I was, and indulged in my misery. By the time I had reached my 40th, I had given up on any form of intimacy with others. My soul had been captured by the woman in the window, and I came to accept the eternal loneliness. It's funny how we find ourselves on one path, only for fate to direct you on another. And by some miracle, a familiar face found me, Amber. I hadn't seen her since our last days of high school, and she practically looked the same, still beautiful as the day I first met her. It was by chance that we had run into each other at the supermarket. I was gathering my usual several boxes of mac and cheese when the mist began to form, and before it took complete hold of me, Amber's angelic voice called out to me, snapping me back to our reality. Apparently, she had just moved back, told me how I hadn't aged a bit. I think most people would have picked up on the subtle flirting, but I remained unmoved by the gesture and spoke to her in a monotone manner. My cold demeanor didn't dissuade her, though. She was genuinely happy to see me, told me she moved back because of her recent divorce. Something about feeling the happiest here. I couldn't explain why such a benevolent person would waste time on someone like me, but we exchanged numbers and began a friendship. It didn't take long for us to start dating, my heart awakening to her presence as if it had been dormant for the last 2 decades. I felt hopeful with Amber in my life, the vibrance of my world opening back up, presenting me with a breath of fresh air. Even though our connection was strong, I still found it hard to be intimate. Opening myself up was a thing hard to do after years of being a recluse. But deep down I knew why I couldn't, and it was because of her, the monster in the window. She came to me one night while me and Amber slept. The scent of mist awakening me, I looked around the room confused as the daunting encounter began to unfold. Amber's soft snoring fluttered in the air, causing me to smile at her with such beguilement, and I shut my eyes tightly, trying to fend off the monster's presence. But it was relentless, and soon I found myself standing in front of that abysmal brick house. I didn't want to look at it. I tried my best to look away, but it forced my gaze towards it, pulling my attention with all of its allure. It was more horrifying than ever. She had grown several arms that resembled massive tentacles, and they spiraled around grotesquely. "No!" I screamed at it, my voice echoing through the haze of mist. I needed to defeat this beast once and for all before it ruined my happiness with Amber, and I clenched my fist furiously. Before I could even attempt to run towards the devil, it did something I had never seen it do before, and that was it. Looked down directly at me. I stood frozen with horror, not sure what this meant. She had finally acknowledged me after all these years, my hands relaxing back to an open palm as I continued staring on with amazement. She then began to move uncontrollably, spasming her limbs like some ragged marionette, sending a chill down my spine as my gaze remained fixated on her. To my horror, the monster began to crawl out of the window, its legs slithering down the wall like some nightmarish spider. The monster crawling closer to me as it gurgled out a horrid wheezing sound. I didn't know what to do. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the terrifying impact, and that's when I heard Amber's voice. "What the hell?" my sweet Amber called out. I turned to her standing behind me, horrified at what she was seeing, and I weakly asked if she could see her. The woman in the window. She quietly nodded her head up and down as she continued staring disgusted. I began sobbing, falling to my knees, feeling defeated as I clutched onto Amber's legs, pleading for her to run away. I tried telling her that I was cursed, that the woman in the window was my torment for life, that she didn't need to be tortured as I was. To my astonishment, Amber pulled me up to her eye level, grasping my face with her soft hands, telling me that we were in this together. I could hear the monster behind me getting closer, the sounds of those tentacles slithering closer towards us. Amber then told me something I hadn't heard before in my entire miserable life. She told me that she loved me. I looked at her with tears slipping down my face, her emerald green eyes looking deep into my soul, and I smiled, telling her the same, pulling her into my embrace, and that's when the monster behind me squealed out in anguish as the slithering footsteps halted. Slowly the mist faded away, and I found myself back in my room with Amber still holding me. I didn't know how I knew, but in that moment, I realized the curse was broken, and I sensed that the woman in the window was gone. Me and Amber are happy now. I have fully opened up to her about my experience. She tells me that monsters sleep but never truly stay buried, that we must stay vigilant. It's been years since I have seen the woman in the window, and me and Amber are engaged to be married, though I understand that it lurks in the shadows ready to reappear in my life at any moment. My only advice to others is if you ever see a beautiful woman in the window, don't stare at it. Just run, because it could become a curse for life. That's a wrap for today on the Midnight Mystery. Hope you guys had as much fun as we did. If you liked what you saw, hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. Oh, and don't be shy. Drop a comment below with your thoughts or any cool mystery ideas you want us to check out. Until next time, we'll see you in the next Midnight Mystery.